Thank you so much, Brett. Before we start, we'll say one thing about this church. Some of you may have been here a long time, just here. Some of you may be very new, and you may have that feeling, all of you, that God is up to something in this church, and you are 100% correct. Brad and Julie, Teresa, and I have such a respect and affection for you. Very deep. You may not know that Brad, when I've got a question or a big decision or something, I often will call Brad and say, can I bounce this off of you because of his wisdom and how much I trust him? I helped Brad look for this associate pastor position forever. And then Noah Case came along, and we realized this is a humble force to be reckoned with. Those are our favorite people, humble forces to be reckoned with, Noah. So we're so thankful you're part of this team. Atlee, your kid's pastor, I actually went up to her in the hallway of Middlebrook and said, I love you, I love having you on staff, but you should go to West because they will be able to utilize more of you than we can. And all of you needs to be in the kingdom. So, and then we have a particular bond and affection for your church administrator, Betty Miller. We happen to be Betty's sister,
my
Teresa.
sister.
There you go. And my sister-in-law. And when Brad said, I think I'm going to hire Betty Miller, I said, you're smarter than I even thought you were. So, and this, I hope, Brad, this will be helpful. But if you ever want entertainment, just let Mike and Betty come up and tell the reality show version of Rick and Teresa.
Or not.
Or not. Yeah, they know a lot. All right, so there are so many verses in Proverbs we could start with to talk about marriage and relationships. A couple of them are really fun to talk about, but not with children in the room, so we won't do those, okay? So let's start with this one. Proverbs 24:27. Prepare your work outside, get everything ready for yourself in the field, and after that, build your house. There's so much wisdom in that. Before you build it, consider, what are you building? What's your vision? What are your resources? What materials is this going to require? And lay it out and know what you're going to do, and then start building your house. Prepare for the vision you have for what this house is going to be. Get the blueprints, get the materials together, know what it is. Proverbs 24:27. Okay? Now, let me tell you a story. Russell King, who lives in Cleveland, Tennessee, and his nephew decided to build their dream house on Mexico Beach, Florida. I'll show you a picture of that. Not yet. Nope, we'll take that off, you would. Take that off. Thank you. Just don't go there yet. And when they did, they said this, let's build the house so that it will last. So the Mexico Beach rules or building codes would require you to build a house that would survive at least a Category 2 earthquake. I mean, not earthquake. Hurricane. At least a Category 2 hurricane. So they put the pylons 40 feet down into the sand. They took screws, bolts, beams that far exceeded code. In fact, Russell and his nephew doubled the cost of the construction to build their house. And this is what they said: we want to build a dream house that will survive the big one that will last for generations. And so when the big one came, Hurricane Michael 2018, Category 5, this is what Mexico Beach looked like. And there is Russell and his nephew's house. When Teresa and I were dating and got engaged, we said to each other, let's don't have a good marriage, let's have a great marriage. We were very naive about what that meant. But we wanted to build something that would last. We wanted to build something that would have an impact for generations. And so all along the way, we've had to understand more and more of what that means in each season, with each hurricane that came through. And to be honest with you, we've had the big one in our careers, in our finances, in our marriage, and in our parenting. We've had Category 5. Thought that was going to wipe us out. Thought we weren't going to make it through that one. And so what we share with you today is helping you wherever you are. You might be single or not married yet. Or maybe you're newly married, or you're going to be married, maybe even married longer than we have. We were in our 39th year. But we want to encourage you to think about, to imagine, to understand the materials and the skills as you step back and look at building a marriage that is intimate and real and would last. Proverbs 4:3 says this, 24:3 says this. By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. The more you gain wisdom about relationships, about who God is, about how we are called together in a marriage and a family, the more you're able to build something that will last, that will withstand the big ones. And here's the beautiful thing about a marriage. When it's done well and redemptively, not perfectly, one of our children describes Teresa and I as waves who crash into each other. That gives you the image, right? Well, you crash into each other with grace and with the work of the Spirit of God. It's not just you that's benefiting. It's generations that are benefiting. So Teresa's going to share with you a couple of the materials and skills that are so essential if you're going to build something to withstand the big ones.
One of the things when construction happens that's critical that I didn't know nothing about because I know nothing. So I'm going to sound like I know a little bit, but I really know nothing. We built a sunroom on the back of our house, and I knew that the foundation was really important to a house. You hear that. Anybody, the wise man builds his house on the rock, right? But what I didn't know was that there's this thing that goes before the foundation called your footers that are vital to the success of even the foundation. And if those are not grounded onto bedrock, then the foundation itself will crack. Having lived a few years in New Orleans, Louisiana, it doesn't take long to see houses that didn't get put all the way down onto bedrock and all the shifting that goes on. And so today, in the brief time that we have, because I feel like this is like, we're going to talk about marriage in 20 minutes. Like, what are we really going to say, right? But two key things. There's a group called Prepare and Rich that talks about, they did this 5-year study over on one of a test that they provide. And two key elements that they talk about that are essential for a successful marriage are things we want to talk about with you today. But every relationship, every marriage goes through a process. And so your marriage is in one of these places today, right? So the first one is the forming stage of a relationship, and that is, in that season, we kind of idealize each other. And the things that are, Rick and I could not be more different people. Anybody that knows us knows that's true.
We do nothing the same alike at all, or have a hard time understanding each other.
And so in the early stages of your relationship, those differences are like, you complete me. The differences here are I love this about you, right? It's awesome. And then about year 2 to 7 of your marriage, typically, you hit what we call the storming stage of the relationship. And in that season, you start to, those differences become irritants. We joke and say when Rick eats an apple and it starts to irritate me, that would be a good sign that something else is going on in the room, right? Like, it's not really about the apple, but we need to sit down and kind of do a little inventory time. In the storming stage, those differences irritate us. We start to question, why did I marry this person? And why did I think this was a good thing? Why did I think these differences were good? Right? Because they're starting to, if we allow them, we call that the crucible stage of a marriage. And you come out at the end of a crucible in one of 3 places. One is that people get out of their marriages, right? 50%. And that's true in the church and outside the church. We just leave because the pain is so intense. Thank you. I just don't want to be so breathy on you. And so in that stage, this hurts too much, I'm out of here. The second thing we do is that we just make peace, and we have what I call We keep the covenant in the sense of the letter of the law. We decide we're not going to divorce. We're going to stay in it. But we don't press in and press through. We go into parallel lives. We coexist in a marriage. That's not a great marriage. None of you got married, of those of you who are married, to live parallel lives. And yet, many of us settle into that. And then the final one is that we move into a new normal. We move through that crucible and we come to understand that marriage is the great setup. It's God's chief tool to reshape you, transform you. It's a gift, not a threat, if you'll embrace it and walk it through. And that's when we get into the norming. We now understand those differences. I have a more mature view of you. I understand you're a flawed person. You understand clearly that I'm a flawed person. And yet we've made a covenant and we love each other and actually love each other more deeply because of those things, which is just that crazy upside down thing of the gospel, right? So that's the journey that we're on. And there are two skills that are vital, that prepare and enrich, that study and survey that they did. Two key components came out of the study that demonstrated what is it that makes for a happy, successful marriage versus a dissatisfied and unhappy marriage. And it's this: communication, the ability to talk through and work through things, and conflict. So today, again, because we just have a very brief time, I want to give you just a little snippet of communication that I think, understood well, at least transformed our relationship. And I think for many couples that I work with, it does for them as well. It's this. We have both internal and external processors. You've heard the term introvert, extrovert, right? Introverts fill up when they're with people. Introverts get depleted by people. Extroverts fill up with people, right? Internal and external processors are a little different than that. Internal means that before I put words out of my mouth, I process and think through every detail of that journey.
That would be me.
That would be Rick. External processors think as they talk. That would be me.
I have never asked my wife. We've been married 38 years. I've never said, "How do you feel?" I automatically know because she's going to tell me in vivid detail exactly how she feels.
That could be true. So what happens is it's really, really important in a marriage. And this, talk about an irritant. It is unfathomable to me to not know what I think or feel. And I can ask Rick, well, what do you think about that? And sometimes I'll ask him things like that, and there's this pause that's longer than
It's just about a minute or so.
5 minutes or so.
It's not like I'm eating an apple or
And I'll go, did you hear me? So just know that, so for example, let's just talk real quickly. If I say to Rick, hey, what would you think if we put a deck on the back of the house and then put a fire pit over here and maybe a water feature over there and right? And he would immediately go, do you have any idea how much that costs? It would be, and we've got 2 kids about to go to college. The reason I'm giving that example is we actually had that conversation back when we were about to have 2 boys going to college. And immediately I feel like a wet blanket has come over me. I used to say, you can suck the life out of joy faster than any soul I know. Because I'm just dreaming and thinking. And
how did you feel about that? No, sorry.
Yeah. And thinking through that journey, right? Now, let's flip it. If Rick comes to me and says, hey, I'm thinking about putting a deck on the back of the house, and I'd like to have a fire pit over here and a water feature over here, and wouldn't that be cool? And we could have groups over, yeah. And I go, that'd be awesome. Thinking through my lens. He's already called the contractor. He knows exactly how much it is, and he's picking up the phone and saying, go. And I'm going, wait. we got 2 kids about to go to college. Like, we can't, right? But knowing which one you are is really important in a communication, because we tend to always communicate and assume out of our own framework. And so understanding that can make a huge difference. And so I've learned to do things like say, hey, I'm just processing with you out loud. And I know that when he comes to me with something, it is not an off the fly, he's just dreaming. He has thought through that well and long. And that same thing plays into conflict, right? In terms of when we have conflict, I want to say it and get it out and be done with it. And Rick needs to think through the whole thing before he's going to come to me and talk to me about the thing that's irritating. And so if I take lightly that he's just kind of blowing off steam and respond in that way, it's not going to go well, right? So understanding that dance is super important. The second one that we talked about is conflict. Oh, really important. Communication. Let's talk about this. In the communication piece, 2 skills. One is there's 2 filters always in communication. What I hear you say and what you hear. What you intend to say and what the listener hears. Now, maybe in your marriage, you've been through this where you have that conversation, you get into a conflict and you go, well, you said blah, blah, blah. And they go, no, I didn't. I said X, Y, Z. No, you said ABC. No, I said, well, unless you've got a video of that, like you can chase that dog can chase that tail all day long, right? Like that's never going to get you anywhere. So what's your goal in communication? If your goal is understanding, then these are the rules that apply. The speaker is the only person, this is an important word, who can say what they intended to communicate, right? And the listener is the only person who can say what they heard. And if you begin to say, well, here's what I intended to say to you, right? If the goal is being right, then keep chasing that, let the dog keep chasing the tail, right? But if the goal is understanding and communication, then what you intended is what's important. And what they heard is also important, because if we don't check out our stories with each other, then we respond off of what we heard, and if that wasn't accurate, then we're in big trouble. And one of the ways you kind of know that is when I say a level, what I call level 1 or level 2, like, hey, the house looks pretty picked up today. And I get a, what do you mean it looks kind of picked up today? Like, I've been spending the last hour cleaning up the house, doing the things, while by the way you were outside, right? All of a sudden, whoa, what just happened? What'd you hear me say? And then we're get back on the same page and move forward.
Yeah, and I know you're about to go to the conflict. Let me say just one thing. We have had years in our marriage of living in stories we made up. Not days, years. It's called a dance. That's a whole other thing we teach in another setting. But knowing that you've got stories you make up about each other, and that's where the big 10, the big energy, the big conflicts is so essential to being able to step back and say, now what is real and what are the stories we're making up? So which gets us to the conflict point.
Yeah, and what I say to couples is, look, if you can't get past, like you try the communicating thing, you go, this is what I intended, you're doing that, and you try to talk about a subject and it keeps erupting, at least stop. When you get to that level, you say a level 2 and they go to level 10. If you can't get back in, at least stop doing more damage in that one, right? At least stop, go get some help somewhere to help you communicate and walk through, because something else is playing in the room in that, okay? Then we move into conflict, that's the other one. So communication and the ability to navigate conflict. And if you say to me, we never have conflict in our relationship, then I would say to you, one of you is either not necessary or you're never talking about anything of any substance. Conflict is inevitable because we're flesh and we're 2 very different people. And so depending on the family of origin that you came out of, you probably have a view of conflict. Most of us think of conflict and think, don't really want to do that. If you came out of a win-lose family system, which means this, that when I have conflict with you, one of us wins and one of us loses, right? That's the people who want to be right. Remember when we talked about the communication? And so somebody wins, somebody loses. The other one is the family system. I came out of more of a win-lose. Rick came more out of an avoid, which is we don't do conflict at all cost because somebody walks out a loser. We don't do that in our family. We just put that right under the rug and keep moving as if it's not there. And the elephants and the rug keep getting bigger and bigger. But if we view conflict as something that is really a gift to us, a reframe here, but it's a gift. It's normal. All it does is let us know that there's a problem that needs to be solved. And here's the deal. When you got married, those of you who are sports fans in the room, marriage is a team sport, not an individual sport. Individual sport, you're out to take advantage of every weakness of your opponent, right? Because the sole goal is winning. And when we approach that way in a marriage, it is death to a marriage. But if we walk into a marriage with the idea that I'm a team, you win or lose as a team. I can have the best game of my life and still lose. I can have the worst game of my life and still win as a team member. And if our marriages, if we view and remember that we're a team, teammates don't turn on each other. When there's a problem, it's always outside the team, and the team together seeks to solve it. And now conflict becomes hey, we have a problem, and we are going to work together as a team to solve whatever that problem is.
And so if you look at Proverbs 18:1, whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. That's how you destroy a marriage. You isolate into the stories you make up. You get caught in your avoid or win-lose, and now all of a sudden you're storming. And except for the grace of Jesus and being willing to come back in and work on those things and build those footers, you'll do what we've done, sometimes for years. Our marriage is not the story of watching your neighbor's house just get built and say, boy, that's amazing. It's more like, oh, well, we got to go back and redo that. Well, got a crack there. Look, got to work on that. That's grace. That's the gospel. That's the way it works. But if we don't press into those things, we start running out of ourselves. We isolate, and once we isolate, we break out either into negative behaviors, passive-aggressive behaviors, conversations that shouldn't happen, words that wound for years that need to be healed. And that's just a part of marriage. And so when Teresa says conflict resolution is a team approach, we're a team. One of the things you can do, we have to do is, do you feel like I'm your teammate right now?
If at our conversations, if at any point in our conflict, I start to think of Rick as my enemy or my opponent, then we simply say to the other one, I don't feel like I have a teammate right now. And then whatever topic we're talking about ceases, and the next line out of the other one's mouth is, I want to be your teammate. How do we get back on the same team? And we don't enter back into that communication or that conflict until we're back on the same team. We're teammates, and that may take a few days. That might not be in 30 nanoseconds, right? That may take a while, but the problem is always, the conflict's always here. You're not my problem. Sometimes he feels like he's my problem, but he's not my problem. The problem's here, and we have to work together to solve that.
And so here's your good news right before Noah comes up for question and answer. You ready? I'm not primarily on Teresa's team, and she's not primarily on my team. We're on Jesus' team. That's so good. Because marriage is about redemption. It's about chasing out the unholy, the selfish, the isolation. It's about bringing it out so Jesus can do the gospel work. It's a redemption story, not a success story. We're not a story of 38 years of success. We're a story of 38 years of ongoing redemptive work for the praise of the grace of our glorious Jesus.
And here's part of God's, when I say the great setup in marriage, is this. We're uniquely designed to chase out the unholiness of each other. And if you've been married for any length of time, you know you can go to a place with your spouse that you would go with no other. You've seen your ugliest self in the presence of your spouse if you've been married for any length of time.
And that's by design.
That's by design.
That's what it's supposed to be, because that's where Jesus steps in. Last verse in the Noah, Proverbs 21:21, whoever pursues righteousness and kindness will find life, righteousness and honor. Can you imagine, if we just go to that house again right before we do that question and answer, skip to the next one, just go, there you go. Can you imagine what people said about Russell King and his nephew when they saw this? Man, those guys, they knew what they were doing. Man, I want to build a house like those guys next time. Well, that's Jesus' intent. Not for Rick and Teresa. Hey, Rick and Teresa know what they're doing. We don't. Jesus does. And Jesus receives the honor when by his grace, he transforms us in what could be a very ugly, multi-decade fight, turns into intimacy and life and honor to our Jesus. And that is why we marry above all things. Okay, Noah?
Yeah. Awesome. So we're going to have a little Q&A time. I think we have a slide for you guys. You can text wisdom to this number here. It'll be anonymous. And while we're talking, I've got a couple questions queued. But if you have a question, we'd love to actually get to those in our time together this morning. I'm still struggling with the cost only doubled. It obviously wasn't 2021 when you're building a house. Guys, that was funny. You need to laugh at that.
I got it. No, I got it.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it. Great. Thank you. We're on the same team. So, all right. So, just go to the heart of it here. My kids have walked away from the church and potentially their faith in Christ. What options do I have? Where do I start?
So I assume these are adult children or older children?
Yeah.
Here's what trying to control an adult child is like. Take your remote control to your TV, go 4 houses down and try to use it. So here's what you can do. You can model grace. You can model surrender, which is their issue. Surrender of your control, surrender of your expectations, surrender of your need to feel like a good parent, surrender of all that parental guilt, which does nothing but chokes the life out of you and your child, and follow Jesus and invite that child to follow Jesus with you, because you are not alone, including me.
I will tell you, parenting adult children is the hardest season of parenting. And we've always had adult mentors who were just, the next season of life ahead of us, which, by the way, I highly recommend. And I went back to them and said, whoa, we were high-fiving when we got our last one through college. Like, woo, we did it, right? And then we started getting adult children who were making decisions, walking away from it, not attending and going to a church body regularly, some of those kinds of things. And you don't care less than you did when they were 5 or 15 or 25. You care the same. You are deeply invested, and if you're a believer, that Jesus is the only way you get through life, marriage, anything really hard. And so to see your kids walk away from that is very, very painful. And everything in you wants to grab hold of that, manage it, preach it, teach it. And if I don't know if you guys do the Enneagram, I'm an 8, control, efficiency, straight at you is my style. And that doesn't work. So you say less and you pray more in this season. You pray because ultimately the reality and the truth is our children do not belong to us. They never have. You get to steward them for a short time, and then you have to give them back. And really, this is God's problem, and he can handle that. And I don't mean to make light of that. We have spent many nights praying, staying up, talking, crying, all the things. I'm not trying to make this a trite little sweet church Jesus answer. It is painful and hard. But again, the story continues to be God is wanting to do something in you. And if your kids are believers, if they made that decision, he's not going to relent in his pursuit of them. You can trust that like money. Well, maybe you shouldn't trust money, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, amen to that.
Yeah, so for those of our single parents in the room who've maybe been divorced, what hope would you have to offer? Any kind of 1, 2, 3 tips on maintaining their faith, growing in their faith, as well as they continue to parent in the hurt of a divorce?
Well, a couple of things, and Teresa can add to that. Nobody does this by themselves. And I'm going to say to the church, Church, if you've got single parents in the room, you need to be loving on them really well. Like, this is your family. So I start with that. This church needs to be seeking out and finding ways to care for single parents. Single parents.
Singles.
Singles, period, yeah. But single parents, you're not a lesser. The fact you've been divorced should not put some kind of scarlet letter on you. You're a picture of the redemptive work of Jesus, which is what we all are. But it's a very painful, hard place. And you're going to need resources. You're going to need mentors. You're going to need community. You're going to need other parents who help you. You're going to need the opposite sex, male, female, either family or church family, to come in and kind of be alongside. It's a hard journey. But don't despair of it. And also remember, because it's a redemption story, God can use that divorce, not only in your life, but in your children's lives, as a part of their redemption story. And remember this, parents. You don't get to choose the wounds God uses to bring your kids to Jesus. We all want to put my kid's an honor student, or put our kid's number from their lacrosse team on our minivan. That's not actually how people come to Jesus. It's their wounds. So it's going to be okay, because we have a Father who will pursue them.
But it is hard, especially a divorce, because if you've walked through a divorce, regardless of the circumstances, dealing with your own guilt and your own sense of, I made a decision or was part of a decision that has wounded my kid. Nobody likes that. The reality is we all wound our kids on some level, but divorce does wound your kids. It's a part of it. And helping walk them through, just like we're going to walk our kids through any wounds they have, is pretty important. And I don't think you do that as a single parent without community. And, the church needs to be the poster child for community, life group, whatever. Our American culture tends to push us toward individuality, individualism, and isolation. You will not survive probably anything hard in life, but particularly single parenting, without a community, because God's always in the process of providing the redemption family, right? Like through the church, and look at coaches, look at youth leaders, small group. But that requires your vulnerability to say, hey, if you're a female, my kid needs a dad figure. Would some of you guys be willing to step in and do some of this? Or if you're a guy, hey, my kid needs a mom figure. Would you be willing to include my kid in some of these things? There's some vulnerability in that. But in that is also the opportunity for God to provide a resurrection redemption story.
And if you're our age and have the gray-white thing going on, you have so much to offer. This is the best years of your life. I am a spiritual father to single parents, and it's one of my favorite things I get to do. There's just so much to offer.
That's good. So another question just came in. Let me read it so I don't sound silly. All right. So the question is, it sometimes feels hard to draw a line or integrate my family I have made with family I was born into. What are some tips that you have for balancing time between these two?
Ooh, that's a whole therapy session, just saying.
You can meet Teresa.
Yeah, right. I think you ask yourself the question of, am I connecting it into my family of origin out of guilt, out of some sense of responsibility, so forth? We get really screwed up on some of those verses of honor your father and mother, and we think that means to go ahead and pretend that things are okay when they're not. And that is in reality not honoring. Honor is not bitterness, not anger, not resentment, but it is living in reality. And if your family of origin was one that wasn't safe, that was destructive to you, you need to have boundaries with that family. And you have to ask yourself the question, how do I maximize the things that are good in that family of origin and set boundaries against the things that aren't? It's called guarding your heart in Christ Jesus. And then I think that is the journey of the Lord and the church, is that we then find a community, a small group of people who then step into those needs that maybe our families of origin didn't meet. Because one of the things, our most basic needs are attachment, or connection, belonging. And the natural place that God intended that was in our families. And so one of the problems we have is when we keep going back to what was our well that was supposed to provide good water for us, and it's always had bad water, but we keep going back there because it's supposed to be, instead of going, hey, there's a well down the road, and maybe that's the place I should go for my water. And I have to respect this, but respect is about reality, and then find that alternate community. And a lot of people grieve that. There's a grief journey in that as well, because it probably isn't going to look like finding one person to replace the mom figure in your life, or one person to replace the dad figure. It's probably 3 or 4 that are going to meet the needs that that original person was going to.
Yeah, biblical principle. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. One of your biggest issues is, men and women, you have to differentiate and leave before you can figure out how to do the healthy thing. So when our kids are early married, we realize those first 2 or 3 years, they're going to do a lot of leaving. And we encourage that. Bless them. We love them. We pursue them, but they need a lot of space to differentiate. Then they decide the terms of the relationship, not me. So if you have parents who are trying to dictate to you the terms of your relationship, you're an adult married, you need to switch that around. That's yours to dictate, not theirs. It's not how it works.
All right, I know we're running kind of late on time, but I want to get this one in. We have a lot of people who are younger, raising younger kids, elementary, middle school kids. Give us some wisdom on how do we set up now not to get to the oh no moment when the kids leave the house and we've done this for X number of years and now the kids are no longer here.
For me, that's in a simple, concise answer, it is continue to have a life beyond your children. Your marriage always needs to be first. We so often, look, if you are in the I just had my baby stage and it's your first one, blessings upon blessings. Like there's a disorienting year in there where you're like, I don't know who I am. I'm not sure I even brushed my...
that doesn't go for us who have like 9-year-olds?
It could be.
Okay.
But it's that place you're not sleeping. It's a major life adjustment, and particularly women go through that. I have this human I'm in charge of. Like, this is frightening, and I have no idea what I'm doing. But always prioritizing your marriage. Your kids need your marriage to be healthy and to be about each other, and they'll push to be the center and the focus, but they don't really want to be. And because what they need, the security for your kids, going to come out of the security of this. So always prioritizing. I always say to couples, find a way to have some time alone as a couple, and to prioritize your marriage. That's super important. And then have a life outside of your children, whether that's volunteer, a job, something that you have a life outside of. Because one of the things that I see a lot of women who hit that season and they've invested their whole lives in being a mom, which is a sacred and great calling, but they develop nothing else. And so then when their kids leave home, they're lost and they don't know what to do. And it's kind of, I liken it to when a man retires from a job and has to start a whole new career. It is disorienting and hard, but it's possible. And you need to find places to invest and give. And if what you've done all those years is be a mom, go walk alongside a young mama who doesn't have a clue what she's doing and doesn't have a mama in town. And there's lots of those. So find purpose and focus. The Lord always, if you're sucking air, God has purpose for you. Find it and get about it, and I will guarantee you serving is one of the greatest keys to that.
That's good.
And I'll wrap this up and give a couple of resources, all right? So all the research on child-centric homes, which is American culture, is child-centric home. Parenting is, the whole family is about the children. All the research tells you that's damaging. You're raising your children to leave. You're in a marriage till death do you part. So your ability to love each other and pour that love out on your children with really good boundaries is really, and I told my children, I said them at 13, I'd sit them down and say, hey, we got 5 years here, and when you leave, and you will leave, here's what we need to work on, right? But this goes, by God's grace and health, a lot further. So let me give you some resources to close that, all right? Let's don't put the slide up yet, I'll talk about it. I started about a year and a half ago a podcast called Life Reframed, and you can see there with my partner Lauren Morgan. We are two generations. She's a mom with young children. She is a wonderful, brilliant person when it comes to relationships. And so it's actually Teresa's idea. She said, Lauren should be your partner, and she was right. So Lauren and I, every week, we have a conversation about something in life, and we reframe it in the bigger redemptive story. Just what we did this morning, we take a topic, whatever, and we reframe it, and we tell people stories of redemption. Our favorite guest to have on our podcast is Teresa. In episode 34, we talk about whole person sex and intimacy, which is not what we're going to be doing in here. But if you want to hear Teresa and I talk about that with Lauren, would really encourage you to do that. Also, Teresa mentioned the word crucible. We have an episode on crucibles, on what crucibles are like and what they're for, with Harv Powers, who's a counselor and executive coach in Denver, Colorado. We have a great podcast on there about humility with your own Brad Raby. And there are other stories on there. So I encourage you, whether you want to do this, it's on Apple Podcasts or Apple iTunes or the Fellowship website. You need to be listening to voices that are helping you make sense of your journey in the bigger redemption story. And that's what Teresa and I do, is we try to help marriages. We do retreats and seminars and workshops through her work. But we want to help marriages remember what the real story is. And the real story is redemption. And the real story of parenting is redemption. And the real story of family is redemption. And when you can remember the bigger story, you can breathe, you can experience grace, and you can experience hope. And the best part about it, and Teresa alluded to it, the best part about it is when you take the responsibility off of you making it happen and putting it onto Jesus making it happen and you partnering with him. That's where the life is.
We're living in a culture that is in direct contrast to what you're teaching and training your children toward. And so you have to recognize that there's a huge force. You know, you talk about your adult children walking away from the church, and when you talk about the whole sexuality piece and all of those things, but God's still on the throne. And his church has always been his chief tool to impact that. So don't look at your circumstances or a moment and panic. Remember the one, and this requires a daily discipline of being in the Word and prayer. He's still on the throne. He is still God, and he is pursuing with a love and passion that is greater than anything you as a parent could ever do for your kids. So lay hope in that when the times are hard and dark, because if we aren't clinging to that, our kids are never going to.
Amen to that. Well said.
Well, thank you guys for being here this morning. That was fantastic. Gosh, that was really. Let's give it up for Rick and Teresa. Hopefully you guys were able to get at least some nuggets from that, and maybe got my wife's we're gonna have a conversation about this. She's taking notes, and so anyways, we'll be better for it. But thank you guys as well for being part of our fellowship. Hopefully you were encouraged, and that's really the point of just hearing new voices, putting new folks maybe before you. Just a last reminder, if you haven't gotten a bulletin, feel free to grab one or go out to our backpack table. We'd love for you to pack a backpack and actually do it as a family discipleship process. Do it as something where you can take your kids and explain, hey, we are doing this to serve a community in our area that we've kind of adopted. And so we'd like to at least get 25 backpacks. Bring those you can this week or by next Sunday. The list is there on the back of your bulletin, or it's on the table out there. Anyways, you guys having a great rest of your day. Count the joy